I think the first thing to really think about data is are you ready for data? That's one of the biggest challenges that I think I see across organizations as I work with them is it's great that I figured out that 50% of my employees are fatigued, or it's great that I figured out I've got this concern or issue over here. But if you're not in a state to be able to address that, you can have all the data in the world and it won't make a difference.
Hi there, and welcome to the HR Podcast. This is Linda Misegadis
and Cyndi Manuel, and we'll be your co-hosts. After spending years working in and with HR, we thought, why not start a podcast to support the important HR community? We believe the way things have always been done isn't necessarily what's going to work in the future. So we're diving into topics that support HR and working women as they navigate the future of work. We're talking about professional growth and also how we can support each other as human beings.
We can't wait to bring you insights from HR experts, thought leaders, and inspiring women who are making a real difference in their organization and communities. They'll share their journeys and tips on balancing work and life in a better way. We're excited to learn alongside you and hope you'll pick up some great takeaways from tips and tricks to worksheets that you can actually use in your daily life. So grab your favorite beverage
or lace up your walking shoes and join us for the HR Her Resources podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Her Resources podcast. I'm here in the studio with the wonderfully amazing Cyndi Manuel, my co-host. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. How are you?
I'm good. It's glad that the week is coming to an end. So, that's always, yeah. How are you doing?
Doing good. Things are busy, but I know for you, they were busier because the two of you were in Alaska.
We were,
which is so cool.
It is one of those amazing perks of the job. It's like that is definitely one thing where I'm like, I've been to all 50 states since working for UKG, and I've gotten to see some pretty cool things. So yeah, it was good. But I'm excited about this episode because we've referenced it a couple of times and really talking about data. And so I'm excited to have our guest in the studio today. I'm going to introduce everyone. Talona Felix is an accomplished pre-sales manager at UKG. She specializes in driving business growth through strategic pre-sales initiatives. With her extensive experience in human capital management, Talona leverages her expertise to align technological solutions with organizational needs, enhancing workforce management and operational efficiency. Holding both professional in human resources, her PHR, and her certified professional by the Society for Human Resource Management. So she's got both her CP and her PHR certifications. Awesome. So she's very smart. Talona combines her in-depth knowledge of HR practices with a keen understanding of technological advancements. Her role at UKG involves collaborating with clients, which is why we were in Alaska, to identify tailored solutions that address complex HCM challenges, ultimately contributing to their success. Throughout her career, Talona has demonstrated a commitment to excellence, innovation in the HR technology space. Her ability to bridge the gap between human resources and technology has made her a valuable asset to organizations seeking to optimize their workforce strategies across the country. Awesome. Beyond her professional achievements, Talona is a proud wife and the mother of 2 children. She is also a passionate dog enthusiast, embracing the joy and companionship that pets bring to life. Welcome to the studio, Talona.
Well, thank you, Linda. Wow, that made me sound amazing. Thanks for that.
You are amazing. Yes, absolutely. No, for sure. We always say that, though, when you hear your bio read, it is kind of funny because you're like, wow.
That person sounds amazing. Wait a second.
I want to hang out with that person. It's so true. It's always so funny how that happens. But we're really excited to have you here. I know you had such an amazing background, and we, I get the good fortune of getting to work with you every day. And so that is just, this is going to be a really good episode talking about leveraging HCM data for smarter decision making. And Talona will be the first to tell you she is a data nerd. So, and she's quite good at it.
I love nerds.
I do love data. That is for sure.
Too. I love nerds. Me too. Yeah. I know. I'm totally with you.
So happy about that.
Well, and I was doing, looking up some stats, and it said that, as you leverage human capital management data, it's so crucial for informed decision making in organizations. And data-driven companies are over 3 times more successful than those with less mature data practices. I thought that was really interesting.
Yes.
And with 98% having a strong understanding of customer journeys. So I thought that was kind of interesting, not curious, as well. So, but we're going to jump in and talk a little bit about some of the key HCM metrics out there. Talona's going to share some of her experience, and hopefully you'll get some good tidbits from this episode.
I love it. I'm super excited to jump in and talk about data. You know me, I could sit here for hours and just ramble on. I think the first thing to really think about data is are you ready for data? That's one of the biggest challenges that I think I see across organizations as I work with them is it's great that I figured out that 50% of my employees are fatigued, or it's great that I figured out I've got this concern or issue over here. But if you're not in a state to be able to address that, you can have all the data in the world and it won't make a difference.
So what? Yeah,
yep, right. No, that is so true.
So what?
Well, and I'm curious, Talona, from your perspective too, how has HCM data really evolved over the last 5 to 10 years? Because it's not like we're lacking in data. I mean, most organizations have tons and tons of data, but we have seen an evolution around it. So can you talk a little bit about what you've seen?
Yeah, I've seen there are paper-based organizations. Finding data is really hard on paper because you can't aggregate numbers. You can't use Excel or a business intelligence tool. So those that are on paper, that's seen the biggest growth in the last 5 to 10 years as they've automated their HR, payroll, time and attendance data. But those that are actually were not on paper, but were getting that data, they didn't have anybody that really knew how to analyze it, right?
That's a good
to
point.
me, if you look at an Excel spreadsheet and you see a bunch of rows and columns full of numbers, that's like a bunch of Lego blocks that my kid just threw out of his, brand new Lego set. And you're like, I have no idea how this is actually going to be a house at the end, right? And so that can feel overwhelming for individuals. So really, that evolution of, okay, now I've got the data. Now I'm using Excel to I'm pulling extracts out of my system, and now I'm putting in rudimentary pie charts and graphs to now business intelligence tools. And then now AI, right? You can throw a bunch of data into AI and start to see trends. I did that for a city that I'm working with. We got a bunch of data for them, and I threw it all into AI and said, tell me what trends you see, so that it would give me a jump start, right?
Yeah.
But I still needed to go look at those and validate them. But it at least gave me, here are some things I need to hone in on. And that's making data analytics a lot faster and easier. Then having people like me, right? Someone who is a data analyst, being able to look at your data and seeing those trends. That is also a big save. If you rely on the data entry HR person to do it, or the data entry payroll person to do it, it'll be the last thing on their list because they're so worried about the tactical parts of their job.
You bet.
So really having someone that looks at data, and that's what we're starting to see. Organizations hire data scientists, data teams to be able to look at that data. So really it started out with all paper where you can't do anything, to now having, individuals that actually look at it today.
Opportunities for people. So AI is bringing opportunities. I have a follow-up question for you, Talona, is when we say business intelligence, because that phrase gets used quite often, what do you mean about business intelligence? Can you kind of
there's business intelligence tools out there like Power BI, Tableau, MicroStrategy. There's a myriad of them, but those are usually the top ones that I see organizations using. those are where you can automatically set up feeds from your HR and your payroll system to load into the business intelligence tool. Then from the business intelligence tool, you can put together metrics, visualizations, trending data, right? In Excel, it's hard to look at trending data, but in the business intelligence tool, you can see and set up charts that trend data. And those feeds happen every night. So when you come in the morning, the tool is already loaded for you and you can see all of that data. And then, I'm a curiosity person. So as soon as I start to see one data thing, then I want to drill down. I want to understand, well, if that's telling me that person's fatigued because I've put together a fatigue matrix, why is that person fatigued? And I can then drill in to see that that person has worked 16-hour shifts. They've worked 57 days in a row. And in between their shifts, they're getting less than 8 hours of rest. Now I understand why that person's coming up on my fatigue matrix. So it's a bit more powerful in how you can look at that data and drill into the data.
Perfect.
I love
Thank
that.
you.
Well, and really too, I love the way that you kind of talked through that evolution, because you think about, paper and then the Excel spreadsheets, and everybody got excited when Access databases came around, right? Because now you had another layer of being able to look at the data. And then you're right, like charts and pie graphs. And that, again, some of that stuff, like for me, it's meaningless. If I look at some of those things, I'm like, I want a nice, pretty dashboard that makes it easy for me to understand the story you're trying to tell me around that. And with that, so, Talona, I think that's one of the other things, like how critical is it for HR leaders today, especially, to have that data to be able to make those decisions within the organization, or to guide decisions, because sometimes they're not necessarily making the decision, but they're providing the guidance around that. So how important is it today?
So it takes HR from having that tactical position in the organization to a strategic position in the organization.
Love that.
Having a seat at the table, being able to use some of that data to make business decisions. Now, I do say it is important for an HR person to understand the business and how the data they're finding impacts the business. Because we can look at data from just an HR perspective, right? We need to look at it as retention. This part of the organization only has a 50% retention rate. And if we don't understand why that 50% is happening and what that organization does and what it means to have a 50% vacancy rate and what it means to maybe do recruitment, that makes it challenging. So really, to get that strategic position in the organization, it's not only having the data to support your facts, but it's also knowing what the business needs based off of that data. So tying those two things together really makes HR become a very strategic partner, and it helps the organization and the department or the group of individuals they're working with really understand that HR's got their back and understands what's important to them and can really help them solve those problems versus just pointing them out.
I love it. It kind of goes back to what you were saying too, Linda. It's here's the story, and HR is sort of like the storyteller, helping to liaise between what the data is saying and how it can be meaningful and impactful to what you're saying, Talona, to the business, right? So they really are bridging that conversation. I love that.
I agree. Well, and Talona said some things that make you kindred spirits too, Cyndi. The curiosity. That's one of Cindy's number one, is be curious. And then really kind of talking about what you were just saying with understanding the business, and then tying that to it to allow HR to be those strategic. That, to your point, Talona, it's not enough for it to just be how does HR look at the data. You've got to tie the business. So as she was sharing it, Talona was sharing that stuff. I was thinking Cindy's probably going, yep, we're kindred spirits in that.
Yeah, so. I'm loving it.
That's really good.
And I'd also say a picture is 1,000 words, right? If you look at a bunch of rows and columns and on a spreadsheet versus a visualization, it makes a huge difference. And so, being able to also show that story to the business unit so that they can see it makes a huge difference.
I love that. Well, and what are some like the key data points that drive decisions? So as you're looking at HR data, again, as we've talked about, you could look at your retention rates, you could look at your turnover. There's a lot of different metrics that you can look at, but what are some of those key data points that really help then say, okay, how is this going to drive decisions in the organization?
So I have a ton of fun ones. I always talk about turnover as we need to move to a second gen turnover. So looking at not just I have a 50% turnover rate or I've got an 8% turnover rate, and based off of other organizations, my size and what I do, that seems to be about right. But understanding when employees are turning over. So are they ghosting you on the first day of employment, right? You've job offered them, you've pretty much settled, your recruitment's done, and then they no-show on day one, and then you got to start all over again. Yeah. Are they leaving you in the first month, first 3 months, 6 months to a year? Then tying your recruitment data to that. Where did that applicant come from? Are you using governments.com? Are you using Indeed? Are you using LinkedIn? Where are you getting your source and your recruitments from? Then going, oh gosh, in the first 3 months, I get a ton of applicants from this. We hire them, and in the first 3 months, they leave. But we have this specialty website that we use, and those applicants are staying way past a year. So now you could start to tie recruitment data and retention data together to go, are you recruiting in the right spot? And then 2, why are people leaving you in the first 3 months? Is it because of their onboarding? They felt like they were just, you handed them a big old stack of paper, right? And said, fill all of this out on day one versus the moment you job offer them. Are you engaging with them? Are you making them feel like they're in an organization and they're joining an organization that's got a great culture? Like all the great things about your organization, are you making those known? Right. Are you maybe as part of the recruitment process, you weren't really telling them what the schedule looks like. So they get 3 months into it and say, this schedule doesn't work for my family. I wish I would have known that. I probably would have never accepted this job, right? And then they're leaving. So understanding why they're leaving. So you could use that to help in, your retention and your recruitment goals. Right. But then you could also look at how is that employee working? You could look at fatigue data. You could look at, are they, doing certain things within the organization, like working a ton of overtime? So what is the top 1% of your organization? That's the other thing about data. Just don't look at it in one direction. Don't look at it as just numbers. KPIs are important. Percentages are important. So I did a big project for a large organization in Georgia, and they came to me and said, this facility has a problem. We need to fix them. And I said, okay. So I went in and I said, well, can I look at all the data from all of your facilities, not just this one, so that I can maybe understand what the other facilities might be doing differently to help in the aiding of this organization. And come to find out, they were actually not the worst organization. They were just the largest organization. They had a different mission than the other facilities. And so those 2 things made them an outlier. And because they were looking at just the number of overtime hours or the number of PTO hours or the number of whatever they were looking at, numbers didn't tell the story because they're the largest organization. The largest organization is always going to have the most of everything. So we percentized everything and looked at it per capita and realized there was actually 4 other organization facilities that were worse than them.
I'm sure they were very pleased to get your information because that could have been a big miss. And what I hear you saying is there, you have to consider all the different, features, functions, percentages. It's not just one dimensional, it's multi-dimensional when you're considering data.
Yeah. I look at it as a house. So I have this, when I do some data talks, I have this thing of Legos, and it starts out with them just in a big pile, like you dumped them out of the bag. And then it has them sorting, because that's the next thing my kid does, right? He puts all the blues together and all the grays together and all the blacks together, right? And then from there, then you start to kind of stack them, and then you start to build the house, right? And the walls and the foundation, all of those components are important, because if you don't have all of them, your house is going to fall down. So being able to have the foundation as well as the walls and the roof and the doors and everything else, those are all important to make a symbiotic and happy home.
I love that analogy.
Yeah, I can always tell the data nerds anyway, because that's not how I did my Legos. I dumped them all out. I didn't read the instructions. I didn't sort them. And then eventually I got frustrated and my mom built the Lego house for me. So
I love that.
yeah, I'm a point A to point Z. I forget that there's all these letters in between that you got to do as well. So no, I love that. That is a great analogy for sure. Well, Talona, you gave like one real world example of where you've done that in one. What are some other real world examples of how HR metrics or how metrics can really kind of impact strategy?
I worked with an organization that was self-insured for workers' comp, and they were seeing a lot of worker comp claims and issues. And so we started looking at how their employees were working. Were they working long shifts? Were they working short rest periods? Because we know that there's lots of statistics out there that you could have a few beers and come to work. And if you come to work fatigued, it's as if you had those few beers, right?
Right.
And so we started seeing in some of their areas that there were higher work comp claims in areas where employees were working long hours, low shifts, rest between shifts, consecutive work days. I think the longest person I found was like 276 days in a row without taking a day off.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, think about the long-term fatigue. There's short-term fatigue. There's also, there's your circadian rhythm fatigue. So when we started looking at those, we found in that organization that the fatigue issue was driving their worker comp claims because employees were getting hurt because they were tired and not making, maybe the best decisions on how they were lifting something or what they were doing. We also looked at bringing different data sets together for another organization. So we saw, it was for a fire department, and we saw a high PTO usage, calling in sick. We brought the CAD data that holds their calls for service together, and we started piecing the PTO usage to stations that had high calls for service. So as a firefighter, at some point in your day, you get some rest, right? Like at the station house.
Right.
Well, these were getting calls for service. They weren't even making it back to the station house before they were getting called back out. So for them, they had worked 24 hours without much rest because they were on constant calls, that by the time they were coming to their next shift, they were too tired to come in, or they didn't have the mental break that they needed to come back in. So we then looked and said, okay, well, can you put a second unit out of these stations? Or can you put in a different set of employees? What are the type of calls you're having? These weren't just fire calls, they were also medical calls. Well, maybe putting an EMT unit out of those to make on the medical calls, then you could reduce the fatigue in those employees, and employees will be showing up. And then you're not, because when you have a position like a firefighter, you've got to backfill that position. So then now you have, usage of other employees to come in, increase overtime, increase, employee fatigue because they're now working more shifts than normal scheduled, right? So there's plenty of ways that you can use not just HR data, but also business data to help make those decisions and see those things.
And what they're doing in your last example, life and death. Somebody has a heart attack.
Not
they
making
show
pizzas,
up.
right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, how important is that? And whether it's life and death or not, it just, to me, that one really highlights just the importance of, and you also coming in as an objective third party to be able to say, I don't do this day in and day out. So here's what I'm seeing. You're asking great questions and all of that too. So those examples are awesome.
And it helps to be curious and to try and understand, right?
Yeah.
Listen to understand, ask questions to understand. Because when you start going into business units, sometimes they get defensive.
For sure.
Right? Like you're saying I'm doing a bad job. The data's saying I'm doing a bad job. And that's not really what it's about, right? Each data point is meant to help you make a decision that will be best for the organization, best for your employees, best for your customers, right? That's another stat we did is, same thing. If you have employees that are tired, I don't know about you, when I'm tired, I'm a bit more cranky. So, you have people that are in customer service units that are now tired and cranky, and they're coming into work. And so now your customer stats are, looking at and going tanking, right? Because they're not providing that customer service that you're expecting. We also did a fall fatigue thing for hospitals where we looked at patients that have falls when they're assisted. So when you have certain surgeries or certain things, you need to get up and walk around, but you can't necessarily do it on your own. Right. So you have a nurse or an aide or someone walking with you. And sometimes, unfortunately, people still fall even though they have those aides or those nurses walking with them. So we tied fall data to nurse and assistants, whoever is doing those walking things together. And we saw a higher fall rate with a higher fatigued employee. So you can really kind of bring those business units together. Now that's impacting patient care, right? Not just customer service, but the health and safety of your patients.
Yeah. Which is why hospitals are in business, right? To focus on patient care. Yeah, I love that.
I'm curious, Cyndi, as you're hearing some of this stuff and given what you do when really working around organizational transformation and change management, like as you're listening to some of those pieces, like what are you thinking about, and because I know you use data in what you're looking at, and it feels like there's kind of like here's some analysis, but then what are we going to do about it, right? I'm curious, from your perspective, what you're thinking about.
Absolutely. So I've written 5 things down as we've had this conversation today. So Talona, thank you.
I always get to learn so much from these conversations.
It's awesome. So the first one is, are you ready for the data, right? And I always say that let's not go out and do pulse check or do change readiness assessments if we're not going to actually use the data that we are discovering or uncovering. The next one is you need analysts. And I think also, that objective point of view. So I think that's a role that change management can play as well is, coming in, even if it's an internal change management person coming in and saying, here's what the data says. Here's how people are reacting to this change. Here's some objective point of view. Here's the trending. I love that. It's not Talona said this and Linda said that. It's here are the trends that we heard. Here's some things that are working really well. Here's some things that may not be. Here's what we can do with it. Asking the why. That's a huge thing for change management. Why are we doing this? Why is it, and back to what you were saying too before, Talona, where you were saying that there was an organization, I think you said in Georgia, where one of the locations was what they were focused on. Come to find out it's not just that location. And you discovered and uncovered through being curious and really looking and doing trending and asking why, you really found out this other information as well. And then finally driving decisions. And I think there's not an organization today that's not going through change. So all those 5 steps, I think, can lead you to better decisions, particularly when you're partnering with your HR teams.
At the Delta Principle, we are transforming the way you experience change. Have you ever experienced an organizational change where your employees pushed back because it was too much, too fast, or they just didn't understand why they couldn't do things the way they've always done them? What about where communication was non-existent or unorganized, with important updates getting lost in the shuffle, leaving people confused? And have you ever experienced change where morale was at an all-time low because the change felt overwhelming and not aligned with your organization's culture? If you are being asked to lead an important organizational change, especially if you're new to leading change, or if you're just feeling overwhelmed, the Delta Principle is here to support you. We work closely with you as a trusted partner, co-creating real-world solutions to address your unique challenges, and we equip you and your organization for future success. Are you gearing up for your next transformation journey or exploring ways to strengthen your change management skills? Then let's connect. This year, we're thrilled to introduce Leading Change, a training designed for leaders driving organizational initiatives, and Navigating Change, a training tailored to empower teams and adapting to change with confidence. Our coaching and training sessions are fully customizable to meet your organization's unique needs. Reach out today to see how we can partner with you to make your next change a success. You can find us on LinkedIn or by emailing us at info@thedeltaprincipal.com.
Talona, I'm curious, what are some of the common mistakes that HR teams make when using data, and how can they avoid those mistakes?
So the first is garbage in, garbage out, right? If you don't have good data, then you're not going to get good data out.
Yeah.
So making sure that there's no missing data. So a lot of times, sometimes something gets entered, one piece gets forgotten. Now all of a sudden you've got something blank. So making sure that all of the holes are filled in. Then also just doing some validation checks, right? So, as I was looking at some fatigue data, no, actually this was a federal grant. We were looking at student workers, and they were like, there's no way those student workers worked that much. We would lose grants. We would lose our grants if they were working that much. So we went out to time cards and actually audited and said, was what came out in this report actually what's in that employee's time card? Or is that what's in that employee's record? Are they really working on the grant? How many hours are they charging to that grant? And making sure that those things all align. So spot checking, right? So once you get the data, you just don't take it as the truth, right? You go out and you do some validations on a couple of use cases.
Trust but verify,
to make sure,
right? Yeah.
Yep. Trust but verify. Yep. And so, really looking at making sure that all of that is in alignment before you start doing your analytics. And then making sure that you have the right KPIs or what you're looking at is what you're intending to get out. So sometimes I start with, what's your end goal that you're looking to accomplish? Because asking this question on a survey or looking at this data set isn't going to lead to this end result. That's just going to become white noise in the result. So you want to make sure that what you're looking at is really what you're trying to accomplish. So if you're looking at customer service stats, understanding, how the employees are working, or if you're like a retail organization, right? Well, if you have a huge long line because you don't have enough staff, then you're looking at your scheduling data, right? You're not looking at your employee work data, you're looking at your schedule data. So really making sure that you're looking at those right metrics to get you to that end goal.
I like that. That's some great advice. Yeah. So talk a little bit about how AI is changing the workforce from a decision-making perspective as well. I know you gave the example of being able to leverage AI a little bit as well. What are you seeing right now?
So AI is, again, I think we're kind of in that scary stage of AI, right? Because we've heard AI can do hallucination. And so AI is this very big, powerful tool that is unknown to a lot of people still. So the first thing is understanding how AI works, understanding what type of data are you trying to use AI for, and making sure that AI is actually looking at your data and not pulling a hallucination from somewhere else, right? So anytime I do anything, it's use this source document. I think the prompts are the most important part about AI. Being very prescriptive, not just saying, rewrite this for me. Well, or please look at that data for me, right? It's look at this data and tell me what trends are you seeing, or group, things together so that I can look at them together, those type of things. So I think first is understanding the best way to use AI. And then once you get that, AI can do a lot of the initial heavy work for you. So when I had it was a survey that we had done, right? And so we had asked some questions. There was multiple questions around succession planning, retention, right? But I would have had to go through each one of those and the 10 questions associated to each one of those topics, and then figure out what were the top 5 ones that were the most important based off of how everybody answered the questions. I threw that into AI and said, tell me what ones are the top ones everybody's concerned at based off the way they ask these questions. Now that you've got the top ones that you've identified, now tell me what you're seeing in the subsequent questions that lead to this being a problem or things that we might need to dig into. So it gave me that head start. And then I was able to go in and dive into that data and really focus my attention on the top few things for the organization versus me having to spend hours upon hours filtering through, I think it was 75 questions.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that would have been a lot for sure. No.
And it would have
totally
overwhelmed
agree.
them as well, right?
Yes.
Here's all this data. You organized it and were able to kind of reflect it back to them in a way that they can take action on it, which is awesome.
Yeah, no, I like that. No. Well, so talk a little bit about there's analytics and then there are predictive analytics, and we talk a lot about that. But I don't think that everybody always understands when we're talking about like just how powerful predictive analytics can be. Again, if it's done properly, right? And you've got good data and you're validating your sources, but talk about predictive analytics and the role that can play in your in human resources for sure.
So I see that there's 3 types of analytics. So the first is retro, right? What's already happened in the organization. Then there's real-time analytics. That means what's happening in the moment. And then there's predictive analytics of what do I think is going to happen in the future, right? So that has a little estimation and guesswork to it. So sometimes organizations tend to be fearful of predictive analytics because they're like, it's not solid, it's not foundation, it's not what's really going to happen. But it can help guide decisions. It can help guide certain strategic initiatives. So I'll give you an example of one that I worked with who has a pension. So this organization has a pension. There's still plenty of private and public organizations that have pensions. So we know predictively when someone can potentially retire based off of their age, their years of service, other things that may come into play as to how that retirement system, considers a full retirement. So we looked at when can someone actually retire? Doesn't mean they're going to retire, but when do they have the potential to walk out the door? Because that's when you should expect it. Doesn't mean it will, but that's when you should expect it. Then look at that data, and now let's look at your hard to fill jobs. Let's look at your jobs that require extensive training. Let's look at jobs that, maybe in the organization, very strategic, critical jobs that when someone's not in it, that makes a huge impact. Now let's look at succession planning. And now let's look at maybe a 9-box or, performance reviews and how employees are doing. Do you have employees that you're training for those hard to fill positions? Do you have employees that you're setting self up so that when that person does retire in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, you've got that plan in place that you can easily backfill those positions with internal applicants, because internal applicants bring a huge amount of value and a competitive edge, right? Less knowledge of the organization when you bring in a new hire, right? They got to figure out the organization. It takes them a bit longer to get up to speed. So it also then helps employee retention because you're leaning into your employees and providing them opportunities for training and growth, right? So looking at that predictive analytics of just retirement, tying it to your succession planning, you can get a lot of great wins out of it. And so the employee retires in 5 years or 8 years, right? But you still have that plan in place to ensure that those critical positions, those key components of your organization won't see a hiccup when someone comes to retirement.
That makes sense.
That's a great example.
That's a really good example for sure. Well, now, so I know that you spent, 20 years in the public sector supporting government. And so we would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about what are some of the unique data challenges that that they face in the public sector.
So I think the first is some public sectors are still on paper. If they're not on paper, they're on homegrown systems. And if they are potentially on a ERP system-wide organizational platform, whether that be for workforce management, HR, or payroll, there still seems to be silos in data. There still seems to be, we used to, every department, I would go to my solid waste department and I'd be like, okay, I understand you love Access, but you put everything in that. I need it in our system so that we can look at everything. Not just what you have, I don't have access to this little Access database over here. I have access to this as the organization. This is where I need the data. So I think data silos is still definitely a big concern because, each department in a government agency, I look at it as 30 different business lines or the number of departments that they have. If they only have 27 departments, then they have 27 business lines. But each business has a unique challenge to them. So finding a solution and a way to integrate all of their data and the things that they're using into a data warehouse so that you can use a business intelligent tool and bring all of that data together. I think that's really the biggest thing is IT, right? Like the IT set, like we've talked about, some cities and organizations don't have a large IT department. So when we were talking to one city recently about doing a big data project, and they were talking about all the different kinds of data, I was like, you're going to need to build a data warehouse. And they all went, what? What's a data warehouse, right?
Okay,
so there's still also some growing and learning that might need to happen. And then most governments do not have data analysts. There are some changes now that we see with the National League of Cities, that we see with smart city organizations that are leaning into data. But there are still a lot of cities that haven't made that at the forefront because they're working on stuff for their constituents. But having technology and having data allows and frees employees up to no longer be that tactical employee, but that employee that now has that free time to be an analyst or to be a person that can, look at that data, help look at those trends and help bring and raise that to their managers and their leadership so that they can make decisions.
Yeah,
that's
great. Really great. Yeah.
It's another opportunity. And back to what you were saying before, Talona, if you can partner up someone who's been with federal or local government for a while, who understands, the ins and outs, at least of their agency and the agencies that they work with, and become, have opportunities to grow into a data analyst role, that's what a great benefit that would be.
I totally agree.
Because I didn't start there.
Opportunity. Yeah, right. Yeah, no, I agree with you, Cyndi. It's like as we're looking at ways to upskill the public sector workforce and workforce in general. But I mean, I know the public sector is definitely looking at that. That's a really good point. Yeah. No, and you're right, Talona, you didn't start there. Well, so just to derail a little bit, like what made you get in, like why data? Like why do you care about data so much?
She's asking why you're a nerd, Talona.
Why I'm a nerd? Okay, I was just. Thank you for clarifying that.
It's a compliment.
That's a compliment.
Yeah.
Well, I think when I first started out, as a wee little ladette in Parks and Rec, and then when I graduated from college, I entered into HR, and I started out as a recruiter. And as I was recruiting, I was noticing, because I did Parks and Rec recruitments, I was like, we're not getting a ton of applicants. Why am I not getting a ton of applicants? Like, this is every kid's summer job, dream job, right?
Yeah.
And so I started looking at, I need to meet my applicant where they're at. At the time, I mean, I'll probably date myself, but Craigslist was a huge way to recruit teens at that time, right?
Yeah.
And so, I had to go to my HR director and say, hey, can I start recruiting for, these Parks and Rec jobs on Craigslist? And he's like, we don't use Craigslist. What are you talking about? And I'm like, I promise. So I had to prove to him, he let me do a trial, but I had to prove to him that it was actually working. Nice. So that started my data entry, because I was like, I've got to look at how many applicants I'm getting from Craigslist versus how many applicants I'm not.
Yeah.
And then that curiosity just started to grow. Then the city implemented an ERP with a best of breed approach of bringing in some point solutions that really could all tie together to help us all meet our needs so that every department got what they needed. Because we know that, it's great to have a single system, but a single system cannot do everything well.
Right.
So when we did that, I had to start looking at data analytics to help us with our FLSA concerns. Were we paying employees right? What were our grievances looking like? What were our grievances tied to? And then going and looking at, and then that just started opening a whole new world, right? And then at that point, we were using so much data that my city actually hired a data person. And he then started opening everybody's eyes, and I would just sit with him and I'd be like, tell me more. Show me more.
Tell me more. That's awesome.
It's so funny how we find ourselves, I think that's been the fun part as Cyndi and I have had a chance to talk to all of our incredible guests is just how they get where they are, because rarely is it, well, I set out to be a data scientist, or I set out to be in change management or to do this, to do that. It's always just kind of funny that there's something along the path that makes you go, that curiosity, right? It kind of really plays a big role. So no, I think I love that. Well, I'm kind of curious your perspective on how government agencies can modernize their data-driven HR practices, even without, because not all of them have the technology in place to be able to do that. So what are some simple steps that HR practitioners can take to do that?
So I think it would really start with understanding what data they do have access to.
Okay.
Right. Now, I'm sure they're using some sort of system somewhere that has data in it. What is that data? What can they potentially do with that data? Sometimes when you look at data and you pull it together, I mean, there have been plenty of times. I will tell you, when I was a payroll managing payroll and doing payroll stuff, we had a ton of historical corrections coming in, meaning we weren't getting employee time on the time card to pay them in time, and we were having to go back and fix it. Right. And I was adamant that the number of historical corrections were coming from time cards that employees weren't approving because they weren't looking at it. Right. So if they weren't looking at it, then they wouldn't realize that their time wasn't on that time card to actually get them paid within that 2 weeks.
Yeah.
When we actually did it, more historical corrections came on employee approved time cards than unapproved time cards.
Oh,
because what they were doing was just rubber stamping.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay. You've told me I've got to approve my time card. Fine. I'm just going to go in and approve it and I'm going to lock out. And they wouldn't actually look at it. And so then they would get their paycheck and be like, oh my gosh, you missed my overtime or my call out pay or whatever it may have been. And so, sometimes having a hypothesis of you've got a problem, you can see your problem because you're dealing with it day in and day out. It's taking you a ton of time. Well, what data do I have to look at that? And so then we had to go actually back and do a whole training with employees on how do I actually look at my time card to make sure I'm getting paid correctly?
Yeah.
Right.
And
right.
why
I never would have thought I would have found myself there.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's true. That's a really good example of just something simple. Like you don't have to have advanced technology. It was something that you were noticing that there was a high volume of these transactions. So let's go investigate. You had a hypothesis, right, as to what you thought the problem was, and then you discovered what the actual problem was. And so no, I think that's a really great example of just some simple ways, even if you don't have the advanced solutions or the advanced skill set necessarily to do that.
And at that time, I didn't have a business intelligence tool, so that was pulled out into Excel.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no. So it goes to show, it can be done. It may be a little harder, but it can be done for sure. As you're looking ahead, what, for people who have an interest in maybe wanting to get into data science or data analytics, or, if we've got some curious HR professionals out there who are like, ooh, everything I've heard Talona talk about today is pretty exciting.
Sounds
what
cool.
advice would you give them on how do they get into it? What guidance would you give them?
I think I would start small, right?
Okay.
Start with something that you can actually do yourself. So, that one that I did on the whole historical corrections once, I was pulling down data from our, every payroll to see who had approved time cards. And then I was lining them up with who had historical corrections. And, I kind of did it myself. Then once our city manager and our, HR department, our payroll, finance, everybody was like, wow, this is kind of cool. We need to start doing more of that. Mm-hmm. Then I got IT involved and said, okay, I need a bigger, better, faster way to do this. This is very manual. I need a more automated way to pull this data in. And then from there, just started working with my IT person, and he was going through and telling me what data I could pull, what data I couldn't. And he pulled all of that into a data warehouse. And then I had to go learn a business intelligence tool. And I could say that was probably the biggest, scariest one for me, because I was like, okay, how does this beast even work? So, lots of YouTube videos on how to create metrics and, lots of, time of just fiddling around, right? Like I literally would put a metric together and go, ooh, I don't think that's showing me what I want. Let me retool that, because if you don't look at things in a way that can tell a story, it doesn't make any difference, right? And so, I would just say being curious, diving in, and then, leaning on others that know, like my IT person, right? He was able to get me a ton of data so that I could start looking at it. And then he helped me fiddle with some of it, and he learned the business intelligence tool with me. He picked it up a lot faster than I did, right? Yeah. Because he's an IT guy and he just dove into technology. That's what he does. He does every day, right?
That's exactly
so I would just start small, and then I would, if you can, get the business behind you, get the organization behind you, right?
Yeah.
So, going to them, I met with each department. What are your concerns? What are you seeing? What are you having challenges with? Yeah. And then I tried creating data metrics and visualizations towards those so that they could see why it was important.
Yeah. I like that. No, that's a good one. I think what I heard you say is if I'm interested in this line of work, I don't have to go back to school and get my advanced degree in data analytics in order to be able to do this. These are things that if you have, start digging in, start simple, leverage those tools, leverage those resources to help you. You're right, YouTube, you can learn just about anything on a YouTube video these days. And so if you learn that way, those are opportunities for you to be able to do that. But I also heard you say, don't let it scare me. It's like, it's going to feel a little overwhelming at first, but it's okay. Just trust yourself and trust the information and give yourself some time and start small. It sounds like too, like, you don't have to go, boil the ocean with your data analytics. Just start with some small things and create some proof points. So
absolutely.
Yeah, no, I like that. Yeah, those are really good. So what advice would you leave for HR leaders today? Like what are some final thoughts you would like to leave everyone with?
So I would say, don't be scared of data. Make sure you understand your business and what those business units do and their needs, especially in government.
We talk about that all the time. Yeah.
I mean, a police department is different than a fire department, is different than the solid waste department. That's different than the city attorney's department, right? Or the HR department in and of itself.
Yeah.
Right.
Every department has different needs. So I would really, lean in on, understanding those unique differences, because those unique differences are really what's going to make you that strategic partner, and using that data to help each organization hit their goals and what they're accomplishing to do will really help. And then jump in. It may be scary, but you've just got to start somewhere.
Yeah, I know. I love that. Are there any resources that you would recommend to our listeners, like if they wanted to go and get some ideas and some samples, and maybe is there any place where you might point them to say, hey, go check this out. There's some great ideas around this.
So I think LinkedIn is becoming a wonderful resource outside of YouTube. So I have found several videos on, in YouTube, or not just in YouTube, but LinkedIn, that has helped me as well. And then, in government, everybody loves to talk to each other. So That's true. Your challenge is may be completely different than someone else's challenge.
Yeah.
So, or it may be the same. So I leaned on a lot of times, like I had connections in the cities that were all next to me, and I would call them and we would go to lunch on occasions, and I'd be like, what are you doing? Or what are you seeing? Or what advancements do you have? And so I would really say the great thing about a government community is that you can all lean on each other. We all have public record requirements. So, call your colleague next door and see what they're doing and how they're accomplishing things, or what are their challenges, because most likely their challenge is the same as yours, and you can talk through what each organization is doing and sometimes come up with a way that helps both organizations.
I like that. Community, relationships, network, kind of all those key components that we talked about.
And your excitement and somebody else's maybe hesitation or a little, them being a little fearful, I could see how your excitement, Talona, it would catch on. I'd be like, okay, she's moving forward, so I'm going to hook my wagon to her and kind of see where this whole thing goes. So I think that's such a great point there. I love your enthusiasm about all this, Talona. It is contagious. Thank you so much.
It is.
Well, thank you.
It gets you excited about the stuff that doesn't really seem all that exciting. But when you start to tell those stories, that's what's amazing to me, to think that you take this piece of data and then you start building on it, and before you know it, you have a whole story. And that's what's incredible about it, right? Is that now you have more data and more information. And the great thing about that too is that it's no longer that subjective either. So when you're trying to have these conversations and you're bringing this information, it's not my opinion, it's what the data is telling us. Yeah, exactly. And I think that also helps in that strategic business partner as well. It's not like, Cyndi had this idea and now she says this is the way that it is. It's like, nope, Cyndi recognized something was happening. She analyzed data. She created a story, and now she's bringing that forward to the business. It's a little easier to get your point across, and a lot more exciting to hear the story too. So,
and it helps make informed decisions, because I know a ton of times our union would come running with their hair on mock fire and be like, "This is happening all the time," and I'd go look and go, "It happened twice in the last year."
And so it's Pareto's principle. Yeah.
It helps make it relative, right? Sometimes they would come and I'd be like, "Oh my gosh, this is happening every single payroll to 2 or 3 employees. Okay, that's a problem. This one that you say is happening, that's only happened twice a year. I don't know that needs to be part of union negotiations. I don't know that needs to be part of." And we've also used data to help with union negotiations, right? Like our police department didn't have information around fatigue stats. They were just letting employees work it, based off of seniority. And it was like, but when you got the seniority in there, now we have to look at fatigue issues, or we have to look at this or that. Yeah. And so, being able to use data to help drive, some of those bargaining unit agreements also can be helpful.
I love it. No, this has been such a great episode. I'm so glad we got you on the show, Talona. You're just so smart and so much amazing data. If people want to reach out to you, is it okay if we put your LinkedIn information in the show notes? Great.
That would be great. You can put my LinkedIn, my email address. Happy to help in any way I can. I tell everybody I don't have 20 years of government experience by happenstance. I am very mission critical. I love to help people so that they can succeed and grow and help their organization. So happy to help anywhere I can. And thank you so much for having me. This was a fun discussion. As you can tell, I'm like, yes. Yeah. Now I'm ready to go on the rest of my day. I'm all excited.
Good. That's what we hope for.
Sleep. Yeah,
that's
awesome.
right. Even running on fumes. That's good. It's funny how that happens, right? It's like those things that motivate us. So that's great.
Thanks, Talona.
Well, as always, Cyndi, it's great to see you. And
this was so much fun. Thanks, Linda.
Oh, yeah, no, this was a great one for sure. And thank you, Talona. Thanks to all of our listeners out there. We hope you got as much out of this episode as we did. And
share it.
Share it, tag it, post it.
Yeah.
Exactly. So this is a great one to get out there. I think everybody can take some nuggets from this one. So yeah. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of the HR Her Resources podcast. We're so happy to have you with us on this journey. Music and production by Logan Misegadis of LJM Productions. We'd also like to thank our intern, Lauren Banas, for creating our logo and supporting our social media postings. If you'd like to connect with Logan or Lauren, you can find their information in the show notes. If you found value in our discussion and think someone else might as well, please follow, subscribe to our LinkedIn, and share with a friend. Until our next episode, please take care and continue to support one another.